The boogeyman of the welterweight division has been quite inactive. He hasn't been fighting. We haven't heard much about him. We know that certain opponents got thrown his way, or at least they were talking that they wanted to fight him. But we know, according to Dana before, that a lot of fighters, they talk in public, but they don't actually accept the fights when given the contracts. And Shafkat for sure has been ducked and dodged by other fighters in the top 10. They had to get Stephen Thompson, who at first rejected to fight Shafkat, eventually took up the fight and lost, getting Shafkat that top-ranked number next to his name. And the only fighter that was willing to fight him was Della Maddalena, but Jack got injured, and then even worse, he got some kind of infection, which is going to keep him out even for UFC 305. 305 is supposed to be the card in Perth. That's where Dricus and Adesanya are fighting. That was the card that Jack wanted to fight at, but because of complications with his arm, he won't be able to fight as soon as that. So he's probably looking in September or even later for his next fight. And that leaves Shafkat without an opponent, as the other guys don't really want to fight him, except now Ian Garry is talking, right? We'll see if he actually fights Shafkat, though. I don't know if Ian Garry is willing to go in there and fight this guy. But if he does, kudos to him. He's going to get absolutely mauled out there. He's going to get absolutely destroyed. It's a complete mismatch. Michael Page was even talking about how Shafkat would absolutely slaughter Ian Garry. And after seeing some of his skills on the feet and on the ground, he is just not up to par with Shafkat. He could get some punches off on Shafkat because Shafkat doesn't really move his head too much. But that's the main thing that Shafkat has to worry about with Ian Garry. He doesn't have to worry about the wrestling. He doesn't have to worry about the grappling. He doesn't have to worry about the kicks that much. Ian Garry's outgunned and outskilled in most areas of that fight. And that might be the next fight for Shafkat. Unfortunately, maybe not even Jack Della is getting this fight next because he's not available at the moment. And Ian Garry is talking, right? The ones who talk, the ones who call out opponents are usually the ones that get it over someone who's not really talking too much, right? Jack's a pretty quiet guy, he's a nice guy. He's not someone to really call out opponents like that. Ian Garry absolutely will. People are talking about Ian Garry either positively or negatively. He is making noise in the MMA scene. And because of that, I think the UFC is going to go that direction and give Ian Garry the Shafkat fight rather than Jack Della Maddalena. The only thing that can completely detour that and change things up is if Colby comes back and fights Ian Garry or something. I'm pretty sure Ian Garry would rather fight Colby Covington than fight Shavkat Rakhmonov, especially at this state of Colby Covington's career where he's now like a pro poker player, is what I've been talking about. This guy is looking for another avenue in his career, and it looks like he's got it down with poker. I mean, he's actually beating professional poker players in tournaments right now. It's insane. So who even knows if Colby comes back? Maybe he's only going to come back for some big fight, and I don't think that would be Ian Garry. In fact, didn't he say that he wouldn't fight Ian Garry? So we're probably going to see Shavkat versus Machado, and Shavkat is absolutely going to dominate and demolish Ian Machado Garry, especially after the performance we just saw with him against Michael Page. He was talking all the big game about how he's going to expose Michael Page's stand-up. He's the faster guy. He's the new gen striker, all this stuff. Comes out there to just grapple with him and not even finish Michael Page. You had this whole game plan, 100% drilled Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills for most of his training camp. Michael Page probably did not anticipate any of that, making him a lot more vulnerable in the grappling, and he still couldn't submit the guy. He had that striking specialist back, a karate fighter, and he couldn't even choke him out. Look what Shafkat did to Wonder Boy, which is a good correlation, right? It's a good way to compare their performances. Look what Shafkat did when he took down Wonder Boy. He submitted him in the second round. Not too different an opponent with Michael Page, and Ian Garry couldn't submit that guy in 3 rounds, and he got outstruck, completely lost in the feet. The guy was like a fish out of water. A striker being a fish out of water against another striker. Now, Shafkat has a different striking style. He will be there to get hit, more than Michael Page will, right? Michael Page is a lot more elusive. His head movement and footwork are really tricky, and he fights you from such long range. It was kind of difficult for Ian Garry to find his shots. A lot more than it will be when he fights Shavkat, who's going to walk him down, put the pressure on him, fight behind the jab, and not really move his head too much. But at the same time, he's going to bring himself into a firefight with Shavkat, who could take him down at any moment, or at least shoot takedowns, could submit him even in the stand-up. After that performance with Michael Page, it's made me and some other people a lot more confident that Shavkat Rakhmonov will dominate or finish Ian Garry within 3 rounds. And what it's shown to me is Shavkat Rakhmonov and Leon Edwards seem to be ahead of the pack. These two might be the new rivalry of the welterweight division. I like Jack Della Maddalena. I think he could also give Ian Garry a lot of problems. I just don't think he's relatively on Leon's and Shafkat's level right now. He's also pretty young, so he has some growing room as well, with a really good striking base. That's the difference between him and Ian Garry. I think he is a better boxer, a better striker than Ian. And if he just strengthens that takedown defense, he's going to be a really hard fighter to beat. And those 3 seem to be the new gen of the welterweight division. Shavkat, Ian Garry, Della, Maddalena, and maybe like Sean Brady perhaps. Leon is not the new gen. He's been around for a long time. He is 32 years old, but he's been fighting the UFC since 2014. It's actually insane the undefeated streak this guy has. A 13-fight undefeated streak, and that last loss he avenged against Kamaru Usman. Leon is low-key building himself an actual great legacy right now, and if he goes out there and beats someone like Shafkat in the future, who I think is like the second best welterweight right now, and the only guy that could really handle someone like Leon, or at least give him a competitive fight at this point, with Usman being older, and maybe he goes up to the middleweight division, which I think he should. Ian Garry, I don't think is on their level. Della, not yet. I think if Leon beats Shafkat, that would be a huge statement for his career. And then he could go and fight Islam Makhachev, or maybe he fights Islam after Belal, who knows? Can you imagine though if Belal just threw everything on its head? Turn the world upside down by knocking out Leon Edwards? You know how insane that would be? Belal Muhammad becomes the welterweight GOAT one day, gets like 9 title defenses, knocks out Leon, knocks out Shafkat, cucks Machado, laying praise on Della. What is the betting odds on that actually? Leon is a minus 270 favorite. Belal is a plus 220. Those are pretty wide odds. I thought it would be bigger, honestly, after seeing what Leon did to him in their first fight. Not that he John Jones'd him, but before that, head kicking him, rocking him, putting on the pressure, actually the most aggressive we've ever seen Leon fight before. And he could fight that way against Belal because Belal's style is not necessarily like as threatening as someone like Shafkat or something, or Usman, or has the wrestling to worry about like a Colby Covington or something. And I think Leon wanted to make a statement in that fight because of the long layoff. People seem to have forgotten about him. He seemed to have been frustrated with the whole lockdown situation, and he shook off any rust that was on him really quickly in that fight. But the spirit of John Jones seemed to have taken over him, the whole eye poke. But the welterweight division is going to be pretty interesting on what happens with Shafkat right now, because Leon does have his fight. Bilal's fighting him. Ian Garry's calling out Shafkat. Della is still kind of injured, and he won't be back until at least September. And if Ian Garry gets Shafkat, then who does Della fight? Does he fight the loser of Leon and Belal? But if Leon loses to Belal, does he get an immediate rematch? Most likely that fight will be like a decision or something. But what I think is Leon Edwards and Shavkat Rakhmonov are on a collision course, and that will be the next great welterweight title fight. If Islam doesn't come up and fight Leon first, right, then that would be the next great title fight in the welterweight division. But Shavkat versus Leon is the true best welterweights in the world, where one guy is a finishing machine, is going to make it a very exciting fight every time. That's something we can guarantee with Shafkat. No matter who he fights, he's coming out there to finish you. Leon can be fun sometimes, especially like the first 2 rounds, and then it gets kind of boring after. I don't know if you guys noticed that with some of his fights. He comes out like aesthetically pleasing, right? His striking looks good. Technically, he looks sound. It's kind of fun for a bit, but then his fights get dull very quickly, as he's not doing anything different. He's throwing the same strikes. His output is still the same. The opponent can't really deal with it, but he's also not knocking them out, usually. But I don't think that will be the case with Shafkat, because Shafkat's going to go after him the entire fight. And that's going to make Leon have to react with power punches, big counter shots, trying to snipe him, defend the takedowns, stop the chokes. A complete action-packed fight that we don't normally see Leon in. Man, I can't wait for that fight one day, man. Leon Edwards versus Shavkat Rakhmonov is the fight we need to see in the welterweight division one day. It's the only fight that at this point can save the title fights outside of Islam coming up to the weight class. And Ian Garry's getting absolutely mauled by Shafkat.